Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. I have news from the German opposition for you. On this Sunday, June the 25th, the AfD scored their first real victory in Germany. I told you before that they made it into regional parliaments or the federal parliament and that they're doing really well in the polls right now, but they were never really close to having actual power. They were always in the role of the opposition only. On this last Sunday, however, Mr. Sesselmann from the AfD was voted into office as the next Landrat of the district of Sonneberg in southern Thuringia. It is a small rural district right at where the border between West and East Germany used to be during the Cold War. It is in close proximity to Bavaria, or to Franconia I should say, and it is in fact not really Thuringian. It is in the state of Thuringia, but linguistically or ethnically it is Franconian. Just bear in mind that political borders and linguistic or ethnic borders, and by ethnic I'm referring to the tribes of Germany of course, they don't always have to coincide, so there is some Frankish overlap here. In today's video, I want to tell you what a Landrat actually does. It is something like a district administrator. And also I want to tell you, of course, about the significance of this election. And I will, of course, go over the reaction from the side of the normies and the establishment and what their next steps are to, well, I think you guessed it already, to declare this whole election invalid. But before we start, I want to thank all my supporters and my subscribers once again. It is because of you that I can keep running this channel. So like, share and subscribe, and if you feel like it, support me via Patreon or Subscribestar. The links are in the descriptions down below. Alright, so just for a little background, this was the second round of elections already. The first round was not conclusive, so the two guys with the most votes went into round 2, and that was someone from the CDU and Mr. Sesselmann. He is married, has 3 children, and he is a lawyer, which is very usual for the position of Landrat, I think. It is one of the few positions in Germany that is directly elected, so it is an officer of the state that is elected. In the US you have that a lot, you have sheriffs and judges and all these things. They are not elected here in Germany, but a Landrat is. So a Landrat is an officer in the executive of a district, and he basically has to enforce or fulfill what the district council decides. And in doing so, he of course has a lot of power. He can decide to some part, at least to some degree, how funds are being used, and he also can influence the question of how irregular travelers are accommodated in the district. And that is of course a very interesting question, especially if the person in charge here is an AfD member. So a Landrat is directly elected, as I said, and because only one person can be Landrat, you need the absolute majority in order to win. This is why there was a second round between those two top candidates then. So the win condition was absolute majority, and that is the standard win condition for the AfD, even in a parliamentary election where normally you can just form a coalition, but the AfD doesn't have that option, obviously. So it really makes sense that such an election is their first real victory, the first time they actually get one of their members into a position of executive power. It is maybe comparable to the position of a mayor of a larger city, which the AfD also hasn't managed yet. As you might remember from my previous videos about the state of Thuringia, it is the old Socialist Unity Party of the GDR under a new name, Die Linke, that is ruling in this state, and the governor, Mr. Ramelow, has not really been elected to be the governor in parliament. The election had to be repeated several times until he was finally declared the new old governor after a lot of pressure from Angela Merkel and the entire political establishment. So I reported in depth about the first time or in recent history that a election was repeated until the right outcome was achieved. That was in Thuringia, and now it seems like they want to do the same thing again. But first I want to mention that if you go by newspaper articles and by the comment sections under these articles, well, the normies are screaming and crying out in pain right now. There are a lot of questionable historical comparisons being used here. Obviously, the N-word is used constantly, basically. Another very popular demand is that major corporations should just move away from this district in order to punish the people there for voting for the wrong party. Also, that everybody in Germany should stop associating with people from there and openly calling them out and calling them the N-word in public, etc., etc. So, of course, these reactions are unhinged and crazy, but they're not that crazy, because although it is just a very small election, a very small office in a small district in Germany, well, it is really a symbolic victory for the AfD that should not be underestimated, and only the future will actually tell us what the actual significance of last Sunday was, because a lot depends on how things go from here. A lot of people are saying they should just, let this guy do his job, and because he is so brain dead and incompetent and an evil idiot right-winger, well, he will show Germany and everybody who votes for the AfD how incompetent and useless these people are, and then they will implode. Well, maybe, or maybe he's really competent and does a lot of good things. And what does that show then, huh? That would show the rest of Germany, at least if, the media somewhat reports about that, or the alternative media or conservative media, I'm sure they will. Then that would show to the Germans that the AfD can actually also run a district. Which is of course why the establishment wants to avoid this at any cost necessary. They want to make sure that it never comes to this. And this is now what I indicated already. They want to declare Mr. Sesselmann as unfit for office. As I said, he was not elected as a member of some parliament, but into public office, and that means he must be declared a public officer. We call this process Verbeamtung in Germany. And now the law in Thuringia says that if there is reasonable evidence or any suspicion that this person might be unfit for office because of a harmful and wrong non-establishment ideology, then there must be an investigation into his ideology and his beliefs. And when the outcome is that, he's not one of us, then he is, of course, unfit for office. Yeah. And this is one of these things, again, where you can imagine that the principal idea behind this law was, if you have some mafia guy or some really terrible, dangerous, unhinged person, then there should be some means to remove him from office or make sure that he cannot assume office. But in this case, how this law is being used right now is just, you're not a member of a mainstream party, so that means that by definition you must be crazy and unfit for office. Even though I'm very sure that Mr. Sesselmann has never committed any crimes and that he is pretty clean probably. And by the way, it goes without saying that there are plenty of people who were active in the communist regime in Eastern Germany who are now, of course, in places of power as public officers, and especially teachers in Germany are notorious for spreading the most harmful ideological ideas and calling for massive violence in front of minors in school children basically, and they're indoctrinating them in very vicious ways. And I have never heard that any of these leftoids ever got into trouble because they would be unfit for office therefore or something like that. No, it is only selectively done with right-wing or conservative people. But that goes without saying, you all know this of course already. And as a curious little fact, Mr. Sesselmann hinted at that when he gave an interview. He said that, I think now they're already thinking about how they can declare this election void and have it repeated until the other guy wins. He actually literally said that in an interview right after the election. So he lives in Thuringia. He knows all about the way that this state is run. And of course, he knows exactly what happened to Mr. Kemmerich from the FDP. That is the guy who should be the governor of Thuringia, who was voted into office, but then Angela Merkel called from Africa and said, well, this is a shameful election, the outcome is not to my liking, it needs to be repeated. I reported about this when it happened. So that is what's going on. The media and the political establishment is in full panic mode. Mr. Sesselmann has no illusions about the will of the establishment to make sure that he gets kicked out before he can really assume office. And the small district in southern Thuringia, the district of Sonneberg, has shown to Germany that it is possible that one guy of a small party can win against the entire BlackRock globalist establishment here in Germany. If something interesting comes up about this story, I hope I can make another video about that. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Servus, Kameraden.